Hi everyone, Ashley here and welcome to another video on the Penguin Palace Stamps YouTube channel. Today I'm sharing how to use the Stencils 360 system to make two identical cards, or at least cards with two identical patterns, and then you can do different things to dress them up. So here I'm showing both of the slimline cards that I made. So without further ado, let's get into the card making. I am starting with the Stencils 360 base on my work surface, and I just placed the largest paper positioner into it, and that has an opening of 7.5 by 7.5 inches. I'm trying to insert here a piece of white cardstock that I cut down to 7.5 by 9 inches. So you can see that it fits horizontally because it's 7.5 inches, which is the exact size of that opening, but it's a little bit too long vertically. So all I did was just kind of overlap it at the top and the bottom, pull out that paper positioner, and then just stick that paper down with a little bit of removable tape behind it. And that is how I got that piece of paper centered into that Stencils 360 base. You could also kind of just eyeball it, to be honest. After that was all set, I placed the 8-inch guide ring right in that opening and taped it in to keep it in place. And that I used the 8-inch guide ring because I am going to use this 8-inch Summer Blossoms stencil. So I placed the Summer Blossom stencil with that little star notch right at the top pointing up vertically. And I'm going to be rotating this at angles of 30 degrees, which lines up with the circular notches on the Stencils 360 base. I'm starting with some Tattered Rose Distress Oxide ink, which is this light pink color, and I'm just using my ink blending brush to blend it right on through the stencil onto that white cardstock. And I'm doing the same color on both sides of that stencil so that the color and the pattern will be completely mirrored on one side and another. So once I'm done with that inking, I just pull the stencil out so that I can wipe it down with a cloth. I'm just doing that kind of off to the side, off camera. And then I bring the stencil back, and again, I rotate it 30 degrees, so to the next circular marking on the Stencils 360 base. And now I'm coming in with my next color, which is Dried Marigold. And I kind of just chose an array of pastel Distress Oxide ink colors. So the yellow here is Antique Linen, and I'm just going around at 30-degree angles, one by one, inking up each color as I go. You can see that the pattern is starting to build. The reason that I chose the 30-degree rotations is because there is 6 of them, and I had 6 colors in mind, so this will complete the colors of the rainbow. So I've got a pink, an orange, a yellow, green, a blue, and a purple. This green is Bundled Sage, and when I move on to the blue, that will be Stormy Sky. I'm just using a different color of blending brush for each color just to kind of keep the colors separated from each other. And again, in between each one, I am just pulling at that stencil and just wiping it down with a damp cloth off camera before I bring it back into my cardstock. So I just have one more color to go in the pattern here, and that is Dusty Concord, which is the purple shade. And after that, I will have completed my rainbow. And you'll see when I pull that stencil out how beautiful that rainbow pattern is on its own. Honestly, I wish I could make a gigantic card out of this, but it would be very big. I mean, you could use it for artwork, which would be really beautiful as well. So that is the finished piece, and in order to make it into cards, I am going to cut it in half, which I've done off camera now. So I just took it right to my paper trimmer and just did one clean line right down the middle. And you can see how it just divides the pattern completely equally, so it's like mirrored. I did want to give it more of a finished edge on a card, so I brought out my slimline rectangle die, which will fit into that piece on each side quite nicely. And I'm just going to pull those off camera and run them through my die cutting machine. And that way you'll get that really cute little stitched edge around the kind of lining of the rectangle. This does make the pieces a little bit smaller as well, which I thought was fine. And I think the final sizes are 3.5 by 8.5 inches. Okay, so now it's time to turn these panels into cards, and I'm starting with the first one here. I took this Never Lose Hope shadow die by Penguin Palace Stamps, which comes with 2 dies, the words and the shadow just sort of is slightly larger than the words, so it creates this nice little border and backing. I cut the word one out of some silver sparkly cardstock, and I cut the shadow out of some plain white cardstock, and that's really just to give that word die sort of an anchor so it doesn't get lost in the pattern. I'm just using a little bit of liquid glue on the back of these words to glue them straight onto that shadow and really just holding them down so that they stick really well because there's a lot of like little tiny bits and I didn't want anything sort of peeling up. So I really just held it down for quite a while with my fingers to make sure everything stuck nicely. Then I can come back in with my liquid glue again and coat the back of that shadow with more glue and stick it right down onto the card front. I chose to just stick it sort of off to the left, almost like in the center of where that pattern's center was before I cut it in half, just to kind of act as the focal point. Off camera, I also had gone ahead and cut out a few little hearts using some little heart dies out of the same sparkly silver cardstock. And I'm just going through and sticking them down one by one with some liquid glue using my craft tweezers onto the card panel as well, just to give a little slight extra touch of something a little bit interesting. And that is pretty much it for that one. For the second card, I'm taking the sentiment that comes from the Words from the Heart Chapter 2 stamp set by Penguin Palace Stamps. And it's just a small sentiment with small font, which says, "I'm beyond grateful to have a friend like you," in 2 lines. And so what I'm going to do off camera is just cut those down into individual strips. So I've got one strip that says "I'm beyond grateful" and one strip that says "to have a friend like you." And I just did this with my paper trimmer. I just trimmed right down the middle between those lines. It was super easy. I did stamp those out with black ink onto white cardstock just to keep it super simple. I did want the emphasis on these cards to be on that beautiful background, so I left everything else as simple as possible. So I just stuck those 2 sentiment strips down onto the center of the card panel, just making sure they're straight with my tweezers, and I stuck them down with a bit of liquid glue. And to finish off this card, I'm just going to add a couple more little embellishments, just a few little off-white colored pearls and gems, just to act again as a little extra accent to this card, but nothing that will really take away from that beautiful bold pattern. So that's why I went with these sort of more neutral colored gems. And I'm just going through and sticking each one down with a little dab of liquid glue, lifting it up with my craft tweezers as I go. Okay, so these cards are almost done. All I have to do now is just stick them down onto some card bases. So I just cut out some slimline card bases using some white cardstock, and I can use some liquid glue just to glue each one down. And I'm really just making sure that those are nice and straight on those card bases as I go, and just kind of going over the whole surface with my fingers to make sure that it is fully stuck down. There's a lot of surface area because it's a slimline card, so I really have to make sure that it's nicely glued before I move on. So I did that with both card bases, and again, just kind of sticking it down with my finger to make sure everything is nice. So that is it. Those are the 2 cards for today that came into the same inked panel. It was super fun to make them, and it's so nice that you can get 2 cards for one, basically, by doing the same amount of work. And I really like how colorful that they turned out. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. If you want to see more of my cards, definitely head over to my Instagram account, which is linked down in the description below. I hope that I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye!